Today we're going to make a concrete coffee table with a walnut inlay. This video is sponsored by Rockler, which is one of my favorite online places to get woodworking supplies. I got these 1/8 of an inch thick walnut boards from Rockler and I put them inside the full spectrum laser and cut out these little triangulated tiles. I used the exact same measurements to also cut out a whole bunch of tiles out of 1/8 of an inch thick plexiglass. I used my table saw and my miter saw to cut the pieces that I'll use to make the form for the concrete. I hot glued these pieces of melamine together to make the form. I made sure to seal the outside of the form with the hot glue gun so that none of the water in the concrete would leak out. I laid out the pieces of walnut to figure out how I wanted my design to look. Once I got the inlay to look the way I wanted it to, I then replaced the walnut and glued down pieces of plexiglass in their place. I used silicone caulk to seal up all the edges of the melamine mold. To reduce the weight of the concrete tabletop, I'm going to insert a 2-layer thick plywood core. So I just made this out of 2 layers of 3/4 inch thick plywood that had 3 coats of Minwax polyacrylic on them to make sure that the wood wouldn't absorb too much water from the wet concrete. For most of my projects I use one of these 2 different concrete mixes. Quikrete 5000 produces a nice gray concrete and it's readily available at almost any big box home improvement center. Quikrete countertop mix in white is a very smooth, fine grain concrete mix that produces a very nice white stone finish. This is a specialty product that isn't normally right on the shelf, so I normally call into my local Home Depot and order it for pickup. I then mixed a couple bags of Quikrete countertop mix in white and then poured that into the mold. I made sure to push the concrete down into all the corners and vibrate it as I filled up the mold. I then placed in the plywood core, added a little bit more concrete around it, and then used my orbital sander without a sanding pad to help vibrate the concrete and get out as many air bubbles as possible. I used a couple of weights to keep the plywood from floating up to the surface. I let the concrete cure for 4 days before removing the mold. The plexiglass pieces popped right out and didn't stick to the concrete at all. Now for the legs of this coffee table, I'm going to use 2 pieces of I-beam that I painted white. We placed the concrete top onto the I-beams and we're ready to start adding in the walnut inlay. We hand sanded these walnut chips with a 220 grit paper. We sealed them with 2 coats of Minwax wipe-on poly. We then glued them into the concrete recess. Now it's important not to use a water-based glue. A construction adhesive works best because you don't want the wood to absorb liquid and then warp a little bit. I placed a smooth marble tile face down onto the wood to hold it in place while the glue cured. I wanted the inlay to go over the edge of the table, so I had to glue in some side pieces as well. I had to do a little bit of touch-up sanding along the edges and then had to also add 1 more coat of Minwax wipe-on poly. I had drilled some holes through the top flange of the I-beams and I just inserted some screws through those holes and into the plywood core. What I like about this technique is that you're taking just a little bit of an expensive material, in this case the walnut, and you're adding it to a relatively inexpensive material, concrete, to create something that's visually incredibly dynamic. For more detailed instructions, check out my website, and if you want to see what I'm working on next, be sure to follow me on Instagram. Thanks to Rockler for sponsoring this video, and if you want to see the products that I used, check out the links in the description box below. Check out some of our other videos, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Thanks, bye.